So he was a Mesa City Councilman, a great Mesa City Councilman. Private sector, you worked for
Rio Tinto.
Rio Tinto mine, and then you had an opportunity to become the president of the United Food Bank. So what's great about having Dave is I have a relationship with him, to have a very candid relationship, and I also know that you are very innovative and that you have really come to terms with this challenge in the universe that you exist and have found ways to still be successful. And that's what I'm hoping to touch on today.
Yeah. There are indeed nonprofits that a lot of their role is just exist, right? Why solve the disease if you can profit on the disease? And hunger is a disease, and so it's like, hey, we need to attack this maybe in a few different ways. But I can't speak for all nonprofits. I mean, there are some that generally are focused on mission every single day. But then there are some that, a lot of the legacy nonprofits just been around. And what the problem with the nonprofit industry is, when we solve the problem, we don't go away. We continue to find other reasons to exist. And let's solve the problem and go away. Let's have the courage to say, we solved this, we're done.
How can you really make a difference in what you're doing? What have you discovered? You've been doing it for 5 years?
Yeah, almost 4.5, yeah. The thing that's frustrating is the way that the government measures food insecurity. So food insecurity in Maricopa County is at 12.1%. We've seen maybe a 1% fluctuation in that number either way. And part of the reason for that is when the government surveys people that are suffering food insecurity, they ask, any time in the last 12 months, have you lacked the money to buy food? So when you ask a question like that, you guys are all very smart CEOs. You guys probably all inform yourselves with surveys and questions and all those kinds of things. That is a poverty question. That's not a hunger question, because they don't follow up that question by saying, hey, if you did lack the money to buy food, how did you obtain food? Because we've largely solved starvation in the United States. When have you heard of anybody starving in this country? I mean, it's been decades, literally, and it might have been some isolated stuff that happened on Indian reservations, I think, in the 30s.
It's a third world country.
We've had some famine. Yeah, but we don't have famine here anymore. And if we can solve famine, we can solve hunger. Because hunger is situational. It's like, okay, well, I'm hungry now, it's time for lunch. There's some people that generally, hey, I'm hungry now, it's time for lunch. I have no means of obtaining lunch for myself today. And so that's a logistics question. It's like it's getting people to food when they need it, which is a far different outcome than what they're asking. They're asking about poverty, and so if we can solve famine, I know we can solve hunger, and we just have to be a little bit different about how we go about it. It's going to be a multifaceted approach, and it's going to take a long time to solve. I mean, it's not that we have to do it with a generational view, and we have to do it person by person. When you're talking to somebody that's in crisis, they don't have the ability to solve their basic needs, and we see this often when we see our clients come through. It's like if they're hungry, if they're tired, if they haven't had a shower in a few days, they've been sleeping on the streets. That's not an ideal time to ask somebody, a homeless person, if they want to go into permanent shelter. They just don't have the ability, until those basic needs are met, to be able to start processing that information. And the same goes for people in poverty. I mean, asking people, okay, well, here's food, but what is that really? The food is so temporary. That's the frustrating thing about being a food bank, is you're not solving any long-term problems. And that's why we need to pivot a little bit about how we work on that issue.
So from your 4.5 years, I know some of the details behind the scenes of what you've been able to do. Can you talk with the group about how you have measured success?
Sure. First, our first goal is to go out of business. It's to close. We should have the courage to say, hey, we've largely solved this problem, or others in the space have largely solved this problem. We don't need to continue to exist. So there's a lot of conversations that are happening in a lot of ways, but so we're starting to measure things a little bit differently. Instead of looking at food distribution as a transaction, which is what it is. People come into the food bank, they grab a bag of food, or right now during the pandemic, they are driving through, and we're actually shoving large quantities of food in people's trunks and moving them on their way in the name of the pandemic. That's very transactional. I can't solve somebody's long-term food insecurity need through a transaction like that. He needs to be more relational. And so we're starting to look at how we do that. How do we pivot from just a transaction where I can count eye-popping numbers. We were at the Mesa Convention Center for 1 year. Pandemic started in March of 2020. We used to distribute food at a volunteer center. We overran the parking lot the first week of the pandemic. We had to move to a new location. We struck a deal with the city of Mesa. Their convention center bookings fell off a cliff. And so we were the only occupant of the Mesa Convention Center for a year. In that year, we did 56 food distributions, distributed food to 81,000 families of about 5 million pounds of food to those families. That's big numbers. That's all great, but you know, what was the long-term prospect for those guys? You know, are they going to be food insecure for a long time? Are they going to need, what do they need? And so I think of Andrea. Andrea was, her and her daughter came to United Food Bank after she got laid off during the pandemic. I think she came about 3 or 4 times for food distribution, got what she needed, she got reemployed, went back to work, and we didn't see Andrea for a while. And we remembered her because she had such a great personality, just really sweet lady. And her daughter was just, oh my, total charmer. She was about 6 years old and a smile at, oh my gosh. So Andrea shows back up about 5 or 6 months later, but as a volunteer. How cool is that? They go, that's really what we want to achieve. That's what's tough. I can measure the big, many thousands of pounds we took, you know, truckloads up to the reservations in rural Arizona and all kinds of food out there. But that one person, that Andrea, we saw her transition out of a situation where she was very vulnerable to one that's more secure. And we didn't do anything too special with her. That was her drive. You know, I'm not going to try to take credit for turning Andrea around. There were some government programs she did engage in with some rental assistance and whatnot. But that's the sloggy hard work that's measured over periods of months and years, not a simple food distribution where I feel good about myself. I'm patting myself on the back because I put, you know, 25 pounds of food in somebody's trunk to get them through the next week. To get at this, we have to measure. And we have to convince philanthropers like Elon Musk that the 1 and 2 and 3 families that we permanently got out of poverty that year is enough. Because everybody wants to measure by the 81,000 families, and oh my gosh, look at this huge impact United Food Bank has. But if I could take 1 family a month and permanently have them out of poverty, take that out a little farther. You got that family out of poverty, and to get them out of poverty, you need people to help them with housing. You need people to help them with job training, financial literacy, health care. So there's a lot of people that need to be around the table. So it's a sloggy bit of work. Funders are not interested in that. And that's my challenge, is I have to convince people that 1 family is enough, because if you think about it, that 1 family has 3 or 4 children, which don't grow up in poverty now. Therefore, going into the future, they are far less likely to be in poverty, and you start shrinking over time the generations that are going into poverty. But we have to have the courage to talk about it that way. Yeah. Because we want, oh, I distributed 25 million pounds of food last year. Great on us. How many people had to continue to come back for that 25 million pounds? That creates dependency, not self-sufficiency.
Yeah, you touched on something that's great, and that gives me a chance to reference the greatest movie that's ever been made, which is The Matrix. Greatest movie ever. There's really no argument. I'm gonna. Well, I know of a practice that's done where a corporation will engage with a food bank, bring them in. They bring your cans and they bring your bags, and the employees during their lunch break come. And they take the cans and they put them in the bags. And then a big check is written. And then everybody goes back and they're like, man, we did it.
We did our part.
We did our part. And then the food bank takes all of the cans out of the bags and loads it all back up into the truck. And there's a thing, right? There's a matrix metaphor here, right? Where that's just totally garbage. And yet, there was a check that was given to buy more food in order to hand it to people that have no more food.
Sure.
So you talked about how describing to donors and to helping them to get out of the matrix, to be able to see a correct model. How else are you finding ways to navigate that bureaucratic mess in order to find success?
The first thing that we need to do is quit looking at other nonprofits as competition. That's not true.
And that's the way that it's set up now.
Oh yeah, we want to cannibalize each other because we want that almighty donor dollar. My competition is not St. Mary's Food Bank. It is not a New Leaf. It's not a Child Crisis Center or the American Heart Association or all those wonderful nonprofits that do wonderful work. My competition is you. Because you guys all have marketing budgets for your business that are trying to pull the almighty dollar towards your business, right? Gucci, Burger King, Walmart, Ford, all these companies. I'm competing against Madison Avenue. I'm not competing against other nonprofits. If we could shift 1% of the donor of dollars that are spent in the United States to nonprofits that were super effective doing their jobs, I mean, I'd have all the money I needed. I mean, we're a very resource-heavy nonprofit. We have heavy trucking, we have warehousing, we have giant refrigerator freezers and all those kinds of things. I spend $130,000 a year on fuel. We spend $100,000 a year just keeping our refrigerators and freezers going.
They're massive.
Yeah, they're huge. It's like Costco times 2, so we don't look at those other nonprofits anymore as competitors. We look at them as collaborators. And so if we can share a grant with somebody, that I can use their case manager to work with one of my families that are going through some crisis, that's a great pairing. So now I've got one more person around their table in their journey out of poverty, and maybe they're helping them with financial literacy. Maybe Bank of America decides to, they give me a grant to help me do financial literacy. So we layer up. It's not just about food, but I can't do it myself as a nonprofit. I will never be able to afford enough case managers to manage all the people that come through the food bank. So we have to partner. And we're just really trying to get other nonprofits to think that way too. Think about how to be a partner with other nonprofits, focusing on a family, and then let's share some of that information amongst each other. And we want to respect privacy, but a client of a New Leaf should know if their people are coming to a food bank. And they should know if they're getting services, housing services somewhere. And now you start really thinking about all the people around the table for that family and getting them out of poverty. But yeah, we just have to quit thinking about each other as competitors, but more as collaborators, and realize that our competitors are those high dollar advertisers over there on Madison Avenue who are pulling money to other locations other than giving it to charity.